Note taker has clicked record. Thank you. Again, I'm Abby Massaro. I'm going to be facilitating today, and we have a fantastic, diverse group with us of participants. So thanks again. And I'm really looking forward to learning about how each of your positions or businesses relate to this topic, and also the challenges that you face in the reuse world. I thought we could start by going around the room and having everyone introduce themselves and share a little something about your industry or company. So I can start. I am here on behalf of Recycling Works in Massachusetts. And for those of you who don't know, Recycling Works is a free recycling assistance program for Massachusetts businesses, which is funded by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and delivered under contract by the Center for Ecotechnology, who is the environmental nonprofit that I work for. Recycling Works offers free technical assistance to construction projects throughout Massachusetts to keep recyclable and readily reusable materials out of the street. So next we can go in order of on my screen. It looks like we have Susan Casino. Do you want to introduce yourself to the group, please?
Sure. My name is Susan Casino. I'm the recycling director for the city of Boston. And I am currently working on the implementation of the city's zero waste plan. And we started at the request of local industry people, I guess, a mix of folks who were interested in preserving building materials. So I think it was originally the Historic Preservation Alliance was interested in, but Abby, you've been to a meeting, and I think we have, I don't know, maybe about 20 or so folks on that. So there's a real interest in this topic, and it is totally not my expertise. However, because the zero waste plan covers everything, and this is a very important piece, we are acting, or I'm acting as a facilitator to bring these folks together. And I think I know I'm going on a long time, but anyways, I think the interest is having the city have some kind of mandate or city ordinance that can help with this. And sorry for the lengthy introduction.
That's totally fine. I should have prefaced this by saying keep under 1 minute, which I think you were totally spot on there, Susan. It's fantastic to have you, and really hoping to hear more about the plan and how it relates to this topic, and definitely get into some model ordinances that we've seen across the country or even in Massachusetts. So thank you so much. Sure. Kathy Mirza, you are next. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Kathy Mirza. I'm one of the municipal assistance coordinators for MassDEP, and I serve a region of 44 communities in southeastern Mass. And I'm interested to learn more, and I'm here as a note taker. So thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you for joining and for taking notes. You are integral to this conversation. Kristen, I think we've met.
I don't know. I'm from Newburyport. I'm with Towards Zero Waste Newburyport. I hope we've met. I'm so sorry, I don't remember.
No, there was another Kristen. I will share last names, but please, Kristen Walt, please go ahead and continue to introduce yourself.
I'm so sorry. I apologize. I didn't see any other Kristens. Now I do. I apologize, Kristen Fritsch. I'm with Towards Zero Waste Newburyport. And my interest in this is just a couple weeks ago, I held an event with Habitat for Humanity Restore, where we were trying to get people to bring in all of their old building materials and things like that Habitat could then resell. So I'm interested from that perspective.
Thank you so much, Kristen Walt. Now, Kristen Fritsch, we'll take it to you next. We can't hear you yet. Okay. Oh, there's my dog. feel free to, if we can't, we're having audio issues, just type a little bit about yourself in the chat. Okay, great. Jay, you're next on my screen. I think you're the only Jay here.
Probably. Morning, everyone. I am Jay McCauley, and I work for the Center for Ecotechnology. And we're a nonprofit organization that works primarily in waste diversion, as well as energy efficiency for residential and commercial buildings. And we also own a used building materials store in Springfield, Mass. And I oversee the operations there as well. And then sales for the whole organization. And Eco Building Bargains is, again, a used building materials store where we work with primarily contractors and designers, showrooms, distributors to get donations of used building materials from projects they're working on. And then we resell those building materials to the general public, either from our retail store, or we also have a eBay store currently, and we'll be also selling on our own platform very soon. And so we're selling materials all over the world, actually, and at prices that are much lower than you would find if you were purchasing them new.
Thank you so much, Jay. Interesting that now our used building materials generated in New England are being sold to other parts of the country. Very cool. Ralph Mazzelli, you're next. I think you're with Upcycle.
Yes, I am. Good morning. I'm Ralph Mazzelli. I'm with Upcycle. We also are a used building materials purveyor. We work on a project basis with local contractors in the Boston area to divert materials out of the waste stream and into the hands of people at low prices as well.
Thanks for joining us, Ralph.
You're welcome.
Michael with Commodore, you are next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Orbank. I work with Commodore Builders, Sustainability Manager. Essentially, I am just here to learn as much as I can. I've started a waste diversion pilot program with Abby helping as well. And I just want to know kind of what commercial construction can do better, try to get our waste diversion rates up and see what we can divert from the waste stream.
Thanks, Michael. Laura Alves, you are next on my screen. Please unmute.
Great, Abby, thanks. Good pronunciation. Everything that Susan said, I work for the City of Boston on Susan's team, a zero waste coordinator, as she said, implementing the zero waste plan and really here with our focus on that link between deconstruction and historic preservation, and again, from a policy and programmatic way, how the city can support that.
Thank you so much, Laura. Camilla Elvis, you are next.
Hi, everyone. I am Camilla Elvis, and I work with the City of Cambridge Recycling Division. My role is mostly in outreach, but I'm here to learn, and always been intrigued by this subject. And recently, some people from Ecotechnology reached out to us about this issue. So looking forward to learning more.
Thank you so much, Camilla. I think we have next Deb Betty Mel. Did I say that correctly? Please share a little bit about yourself.
Hey, it's Deb Beatty Mel, and I work for Boston Building Resources, which is a used building materials store in Roxbury Crossing. And much like Eco Building Bargains, but smaller. And one of the things that we do a little differently is we have 2 tiers of pricing. We have a lower price level for anyone who is low or moderate income. People prove their income and they can get a discount. About 80 to 85% of our sales go to low to moderate income people, although we do sell to the general public. And we focus mainly on residential building materials, try to stay out of the commercial realm because we mostly are working with homeowners and small property owners.
Thank you, Deb. Ian Johnson, you're up with Linnaean Solutions.
Thanks, Abby. I'm Ian Johnson with Linnaean Solutions. We're a building sustainability consultant and also work with cities on climate action plans, and lots of different things are related to climate change and building science. So we do building certifications, but we also focus on materials and building health. So a lot of what we've been doing recently is working with Abby at Recycling Works as part of the C&D pilot program. And so working with project teams to kind of look for innovative ways to reduce their total waste on certain construction projects. And so we've had a handful of construction projects that have kind of gone through this pilot or, in the process of it, which we've made some great progress kind of helping them innovate and increase their recycling over total waste. So that's my little spiel.
Thanks, Ian. You summarized our pilot nicely. Thanks for that. Janine Bishop, you are next if you want to share a little bit about yourself.
Hold on, there I am. Yes, hi there, Janine Bishop. I am the grant manager for the Sustainable Material Recovery Program at MassDEP. Primarily, we work on programs that reduce waste and increase recycling. I was thrilled a couple of years ago when we really took a closer look at reuse and building material. Recycling is kind of dear to my heart. My career before I worked with municipal solid waste was that of a conservation agent, where I was present at many job sites where demolition of perfectly wonderful, beautiful things I'd witness get destroyed. And so recycling of building materials is true to my heart. I'm a member of Boston Building Resources, and I'm also a homeowner of an older home that is constantly in need of repair. So personally, I have an interest as well. So, yeah.
It's great to have you. Let's see, Dave Bennick, you're next. I know you are here on behalf of Brooke, but is there anything else you would like to say today about who you represent?
Well, I hope you can hear me. I've been in the used building material field for 28 years. We work all over North America. We're in 44 states and 4 provinces, helping groups like, all of you actually. So, and what we do is we're experts in building deconstruction and building material reuse. We help design reuse stores. We've helped over 125 reuse businesses across North America, and we're starting we hope to start a series of reuse stores at the next generation of those, which are called reuse innovation centers, and that's a long story. Yeah, it's really exciting to be here, and I try to keep tabs on everything that's going on across North America, ordinances and efforts and so on.
Thanks, Dave. Everyone shifted around a little bit on my screen, so I think Charlie Flammer, you're next. If I butchered your last name, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a homeowner. I've kind of faced this issue a few times where we've had renovation on our house, and the last time it was a small builder, and I asked them where these things were going, and I called the company up, and they didn't have a good answer. I was afraid it was all going to landfill. The company does not have any storage, so if they have excess supplies, it goes into the dumpster. And also there's a house being demolished. Actually, this week it was demolished, and there was furniture in there, all kinds of things. The builder just couldn't be bothered with it. So I'm interested to see what kind of solutions there are. That was a tear down, and I think it just wasn't in his interest or his schedule to deal with it. That's all. I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of things. I don't want to put it in the trash. I want to be responsible. I wish there were other places I could put them.
Thanks, Charlie. It's great to have you as a homeowner on the line today. Maybe we can talk about where those, donations can go, or where C&D materials go as a whole in Massachusetts after we produce
I mean, I've called Craigslist, so I know there are ways to do it, but some things people aren't interested in.
Thank you.
Not worth the trip.
Allison Frazee, I think you are next.
Good morning. I'm Allison Frazee. I'm Assistant Director at the Boston Preservation Alliance. We're Boston's leading nonprofit for historic preservation. And I'm interested in finding ways, policies to reduce or even eliminate the demolition of older and historic buildings, and also deconstruction policies that are meaningful and effective.
Thank you so much. Leslie Glenn, you're up next.
Hi there. I apologize for being late. What Allison just said is pretty much our interest. I'm from the planning board for Western Massachusetts, and we have a lot of tear downs that are happening in town. We want to see what we can do as far as recycling demolition and also salvaging things from older, more historic homes.
Thank you, Leslie. It's great to have you. I think we already heard from Kristen Fritsch. Irene is having some audio issues, it seems like, but she is the Municipal Assistance Coordinator for the MassDEP for Central Massachusetts. Irene, if you have the ability to mute yourself, feel free to do so now so we can introduce you. Maura, I don't know if you are on, if you are this phone number that's on the line with us, and if you want to talk a little bit about yourself. Oh, it looks like, oh, okay, they just muted. Hi, Maura, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. I work for the City of Boston Environment Department and primarily with the Interagency Green Building Committee, which administers the city's green building ordinance. And I'm interested in how we can increase the construction and demolition waste on green building projects, and how we can encourage developers to construct in ways that make buildings, I mean, we'd prefer that they construct buildings that aren't going to be demolished, but that if how they can construct buildings that, if they're going to be demolished, are reusable and recyclable, which I know is a big ask, but I want us to start asking developers to look in the very, very long term at that kind of issue. So that's my interest.
Thanks, Maura. Last but not least, I think we have Stella Carr. If you're able to unmute and say a little bit about who you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Stella Carr, the Sustainability Director for the town of Lexington, and just interested in learning about reuse in all of these areas, but I've been doing a lot with our facilities and buildings lately, so I thought I'd pop into this working group.
Thank you, Stella, and thanks everyone for joining again. Did I miss anyone? All right. So thank you so much. It was so great to hear, who we have on the line today. Really, again, our goal today is just to hear from each one of you in more detail about how your business relates to this topic, identify barriers and challenges that you face while also uncovering opportunities to further promote reuse of building materials. And then I'd also like to identify, and Erin, talked about this a little bit in her intro, about what actions that we can ask the MassDEP to take, or funding that they could implement to facilitate more reuse of building materials in our state. And we have so many people on the line today from varying backgrounds, so I know many of us know why this topic is important, and you chose to be here today, so you probably already think so. But I wanted to share just two figures that I thought were pretty astounding. According to All for Reuse, the commercial interior renovation sector in the United States sends 32 million tons of waste to the landfill, and every year, and much of this is like new construction. Like we've heard this from some of you today that you've seen, these usable materials go into the trash dumpsters. And then these projects replace materials with similar materials that had to be extracted, manufactured, and then delivered to the buildings. And then the next fact I saw that was pretty interesting was that the lives of these interior commercial buildings are really short. So these high-end office spaces tend to move every 5 to 7 years. And I'm sure this might have been a pre-COVID number, so who knows what's happening with all these spaces now. And then when they move, they typically ditch many of their top of the line furniture and fixtures and generate a lot of C&D waste in the process. So I prepared some questions to sort of get the conversation started. And I want to start with question 1, which is hearing from you guys on what specific challenges that you face at your organization when it comes to expanding reuse operations. So from the contractor and architect perspective, is this really selling the idea to clients? Or for a store, like a nonprofit reuse center, which we have many on the line today, is it storage space? Is it marketing or awareness of your services, or transportation of materials, or something else? So take it away, guys.
Just coming from a kind of commercial contractor CM perspective of it all, I would absolutely love, most of the time we work at the behest of designers and architects. So obviously to have those things specified is great. But just to kind of on our end, I've been working with our waste hauler, I've been working with some consultants to try to figure out how best to divert from landfills. It's been fairly successful. Obviously, there's a lot more materials that sometimes can't be diverted. I'd love in the future to start making partnerships with some reuse stores, things like that, just because I've talked to other CMs and there's a lot of materials that I think, Abby, you were talking about it before. There's some tenant interior projects that 4 years ago, 5 years ago, this place was decked out completely new, and now a new owner comes in or they have a new idea and we're ripping out all of this material, which is, it's completely usable still. And if there isn't an immediate home for it, the owners usually just get it off my site, get it out, I don't want it. So oftentimes, unless there's a really proactive decision-making beforehand and know where we're taking it, if it's in the city, we just have to go, okay, it just goes to landfill or just goes to one of the sorting facilities. And if they don't know what to do with it immediately, then it goes to landfill as well. So I guess from kind of a commercial CM perspective, knowing where things can go. We've been working with our waste haulers, been great, but they're usually great for the kind of basic materials, the wood, the metal, the clean gypsum wallboard. But just knowing kind of where to take these doors, I think is a huge one. We just have all of these doors sometimes. We have all these other materials, door frames that aren't exactly recyclable, but are definitely reusable. So kind of having an avenue from that, maybe the MassDEP can come with some master lists of locations where this can be taken, or subsidizing businesses that can reach out to commercial construction and take those. So I think that would be super helpful, and just kind of knowing that and having that information readily available. So these kind of split decisions of, well, I don't know what to do, let's just throw it out anyways, come to our mind. So we just have something.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, and I think it's important too to mention that usually donating to reuse outlets is free or very inexpensive. And that can really offset your dumpster and waste hauling costs on a project to sort of incentivize, if you do not have space on your project to store a pod or something to store furniture, then sort of diverting some of those costs to that service. And there are various outlets. We can talk about this when we really get into working together, but there are various outlets, like some of the reuse stores that we have on the call today really focus on materials that work well in a home, since their clients are mainly homeowners. And they still might take some items from, interior commercial projects, but there are other organizations that really specialize in decommissioning furniture from offices. So, yeah.
Abby, I just want to add in, kind of follow up on what Michael had to say. As far as like reusing these products that are then getting pulled out of these spaces, I think there's often a disconnect between architects and homeowners and people looking for materials and trying to find where to get them. I think most of the time it's very easy to just say, oh, we go to this supplier, we buy these new doors, we know how much they cost. But I'm almost thinking that it may make sense down the line to have a database. And as these things get pulled out, someone's taking photos of them, they're getting put up, and it'd be a resource for all these different organizations. They could all kind of upload their materials, and then architects and people who own the buildings can then go there as a resource and actually see what's available. So if they say, oh, I need a 6 foot, 7 foot door, up there they are, those will work and they can then use them. But I think it's like making that kind of reuse cycle easier for people to find. So
can I add to that a little bit? Oops. Good. Okay, I'm not hearing. Anyways.
Sorry, we can hear you. And please, everyone, just feel free to unmute yourselves and have the discussion. Thank you, Leslie. Go ahead.
Right. I think that part of this does go back to scale, but also goes back to education. One of the things that I'm finding, I'm an architect as well as being on the planning board, is that a lot of new homeowners want everything new. They don't want old, they don't want salvage, they want new warranties, etc. So I think part of this has to do with the education to people that old is still good. Old is often better, especially when you're talking about windows. And the other part of this is, I think, the architects and the builders are, I don't want to use the word lazy, but are taking an easy way out where they take the wrapping off. It's in perfect condition. They put it in. They don't have to worry about it. There's a warranty and life is good. So I think as part of getting people to reuse it, we have to make the reuse of old materials attractive again. One last thing. It's always funny to me how many do-it-yourself shows there are, but nobody wants to do it themselves. They don't want fixer-uppers in the real world.
Yeah, if it's anything that makes buying used more attractive, it's price, right? And certainly could be a great idea for a show of, building a house with just reclaimed and reused building materials.
It's a great idea. Who knows this old house?
Yeah.
For me, part of it is a supply and demand issue. When we've had buildings come down in Boston, I've often called around to see who would take the marble mantles or these really unique curved double hung windows or something like that. And I'm told that they have too many and they can't, nobody's buying the marble mantles or the clawfoot tubs, and they just can't keep storing more. So I'd love to explore the idea of having some sort of mandate where one, you have to reuse materials if they exist on site, or if you're building new, you have to use, X percentage of reclaimed materials in your project. And you can choose whether that's flooring or windows or whatever, but you have to use reused in your project. And that creates more of a demand so that as we collect these items, they have somewhere to go and people are looking for them and using them.
So I would chime in and add to that, that storage space is a challenge for organizations that are getting donated materials that come in. If you have not a lot of space, you have to maybe reject some materials that may be really wonderful, but they're just not a match for your customer base. And when it comes to older historic materials, the lead paint question is always a tough one. Something that might be beautiful carved mantle that has layers and layers of pre-1978 paint. We have to say no to anything that has lead content, which is hard. And like, how do you manage that? a question we have never found a good answer to.
Just as a comment, nothing's supposed to be thrown away or disposed of unless it's been abated from the lead. I know that's not the real world, but that's what's supposed to happen.
Thanks, Leslie and Deb. And I can just add to an interesting idea that I've heard through other reuse discussions around not particularly building materials, but other surplus stuff in the state. And I love bringing in also Ian's idea about having like a consolidation point of materials that are just available, especially this is particularly, we've seen this in action with surplus food. So especially when beginning of the pandemic, when there was like, this disruptions all along the supply chain for food, there was lots of surplus on farms, manufacturers. So they used this type of sheet to connect donors with people in need or businesses and organizations in need. Another idea is that organizations throughout the state have been trying to identify vacant or underutilized buildings to store stuff like textiles, just stuff that mostly institutional stuff that not a good fit, and other reuse stores maybe not have the space to store, but keep it in a place where when somebody does need it, then we can pull from there. So
Leslie, are many of these actions based on policy or mandates, or are these more from an enviro or economic benefit that people in the industry just have caused their behavior to change this way? Because I would be interested, per what Allison was saying in terms of mandates or incentives that the city could impose.
I think you're addressing that to a different person. It was I don't have all my, it was Allison, not Leslie, I think, who was talking about mandates, right? Allison, you were talking about that great mandate to
yes,
basically
I meant
make
Allison.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, and Susan and I have talked about this a little bit off and on in the past. And so I'm curious if anybody is aware of a municipality that has a deconstruction mandate. I know they're in other states. Anybody in this area that has a successful deconstruction mandate, reuse mandate? Has anybody put on a moratorium for demolition until some of these policies are put in place? Anything like that from a regulation ordinance perspective?
You just want to, are you just talking about the New England area, or can it be anywhere?
New England preferably, but I know that some other cities, I think Portland has a deconstruction policy, but yeah, anywhere that you know that it's working well.
So yeah, I was involved in the deconstruction ordinance in Portland, Oregon, and it's going really well. So I've personally trained over 15 contractors. We have, I would say, at least 20 businesses that have been started or have altered their behavior because of deconstruction, the deconstruction ordinance. Deconstruction is now the mainstream form of building removal for homes in Portland. And that means that 2/3 of all the homes in Portland, Oregon are removed via deconstruction instead of demolition. So demolition has been basically outlawed for a lot of the buildings. And so we built the infrastructure needed to take that challenge on a little bit at a time, but it's worked pretty well. There hasn't been a lot of pushback because it's Portland, Oregon, but it took some time to build up the infrastructure to be able to offer the services, but now they're there. And so the question there, of course, becomes, what do you do with all the materials now that you're saving hundreds of buildings a year via deconstruction. So, you know, that's been kind of the next step.
Has that become a real problem for Portland, or is that, are you say it's the next step? Is that step being taken successfully, or what's going on with the building materials?
Yeah, actually, it hasn't been a huge problem because it's all happening so quickly over just a few years. This expansion, the latest expansion, which kind of doubled the amount, that was only maybe a year and a half ago. And so now I would say the problem is about a year and a half old. And, you know, they've been able to kind of survive and figure out places to donate materials and things like that, but that's not helping the businesses, you know, thrive, because they're giving away things that they would hopefully normally sell. And so we just received a grant to help them start selling more material and expanding the markets. And, you know, one of the things is that, like you guys are saying, you have an excess of marble mantles. You know, that would be a nice problem to have. We're talking about 2x4s. You know, they have an excess of 2x4s. A lot of the buildings that are being deconstructed are the same. You know, they were built in the same era, or they have the same materials, and they're smaller buildings, so they have a lot of 2x4s. And you know, and so, and I'm talking about old rough sawn 2x4s. So there seems to be a glut of things like that, and businesses are trying to evolve and create products to make a product out of those 2x4s. So that's one of the things that we're doing there. We call it remanufacturing, where we're manufacturing products that are made out of these excess materials that seem to be available.
Dave, I have a couple of questions about that program. If you know, are you seeing more job creation? As I would assume more people are taking buildings down, requires more jobs than just demolition. And have you seen or noticed any reduction in the number of buildings that are coming down because of this? Are people choosing to reuse their buildings more than deal with deconstruction?
Yeah, well, that's interesting you'd say that. So two things. As far as the job creation, I mean, we've created nationwide, we've created over 500 jobs, we figured, through our work. And you know, we did a study this summer where I worked with a demolition contractor, and he knew how much labor he would have needed to demolish these 4 buildings. And so we deconstructed those 4 buildings using his crew. And the number we came up with was 20 times more jobs were created if you counted the hours that were required, the labor hours that were required to deconstruct it, to transport it, and to sell it. And to, you know, and we had a couple of people making things out of the products, right? If you counted all those jobs compared to just demolition, it was 20 times more jobs are created from demolition or from deconstruction compared to demolition. So that's the job side. What was the other question? The other
I was just wondering if you've seen more property owners reusing their properties instead of deconstruction or demolition.
Right. So it's funny you say that, because in Portland, Oregon, the historic preservation community, they were hoping to create the deconstruction ordinance for 2 reasons. One is they didn't want buildings coming down, and so they kind of wanted to make it harder and more expensive to tear the buildings down in order to encourage preservation. And that didn't work out so well, because when I got involved, we were able to lower the deconstruction costs by showing them how to do it efficiently. So now deconstruction costs roughly the same as demolition. So that, you know, so now you don't have the excuse of, well, it costs so much more, because it really doesn't cost so much more. We can take a 2,000 square foot house down in 3 days, and you know, so it's not that bad, but it has slowed demolition permits down, And they're still studying why that is, but it definitely has slowed that down. The other reason historic preservation people had wanted it is because they want to fix up old buildings. And when you fix up old buildings, you need old building materials, which is what we're generating. So we have a weird relationship with historic preservation, Leslie, and whoever else is on this phone. You know, like it's an awkward sometimes, like, hey, we're not the ones choosing to take these buildings down. We're the ones saving them. That's an important distinction.
Janine, you want to say something?
Yeah, I've often wondered if there's a connection between groups like yours, David, and areas where there have been natural disasters, fires, floods, where historic buildings have been destroyed, and you know that they prefer to use older historic type materials than build anew.
Yeah, I'm working on one right now, actually, in the Virgin Islands. So the Virgin Islands sounds like a nice place to visit, but the recent years, they got hit by a hurricane, they got hit by an earthquake, and then they got hit by COVID, and then they lost all their tourism. So the Virgin Islands is not a great place to be right now. So, you know, one of the things about, you know, Hurricane Katrina, you know, when that hit, and we came in after Katrina, and we studied the impacts of that on the community. And one of the things we found was there were two things. There were buildings that were demolished, you know, because they were so bad, and there were buildings that were damaged. And a lot of those, you know, it's New Orleans. I mean, a lot of buildings were historic, and so the act of saving the buildings that were beyond repair and saving a lot of those parts and pieces and using them to repair other buildings, that was a great match, right? The other thing is that there was a lot of talk about buildings that were damaged and things like that, but a lot of the businesses shut down, and that created a high unemployment rate. And so then there was a need for work. And guess what? We just said that deconstruction creates 20 times more jobs. So that's a nice match. And so you bring up a good point of when there's a natural disaster like that, deconstruction, if you have the infrastructure in place, which is why I'm going to the Virgin Islands, to create a system for when the next natural disaster hits, that we have a system in place to a deconstruction team, or that can take, you know, people that need work and put them to use, you know, and saving materials so that they can repair their neighbors' homes out of, you know, while preventing the waste, because waste on an island is really hard to deal with. So anyway, you brought up a good point.
Thank you.
I had a quick question, building off of, pun intended, how you are talking about sort of rebuilding buildings with reused materials. How does that affect the sustainability of that new building and its energy efficiency and so on? If anyone has insights on that, I'm curious.
I'm going to take a stab at this, although I must admit I don't have any personal experience. A lot of the older materials are actually, as I said before, better quality as far as thermal, I'm not sure the word is, resistance or whatever it is, thermal capacity, things to that effect. I'm assuming you're not going to be reusing things like insulation, weatherproofing, things like that. That I believe has to be new in order to get a tight vapor barrier. But a lot of the structural materials, like you were talking about, the 2x4s, masonry, all of that should actually add to the greenness. You're reusing materials, and also you have a higher thermal mass which you're using. But of course, you have to then ship it from one place to the other. But if you get drywall from Wisconsin, it's the same thing.
Thanks, Leslie. There've been a couple. Kathy, go ahead.
I was just wondering about Portland, Oregon, or any other examples of maybe tax incentives for maybe residents or commercial side of the equation to use these materials. You know, are there, I think, you know, under the discussion of mandates and incentives, I have a little category here, and I'm just thinking, what might that look like? Does anybody know of anything like that? I mean, I know many moons ago, in some of the DEP grant programs, there was an incentive to encourage municipalities to put in their building permits that that there would be, when someone comes in for a building permit or deconstruction permit, that they would identify at least the outlets where those materials were going. So there would be at least more knowledge about what's out there and in what quantities. But that's really piecemeal because it's done on a city and town basis here. So I kind of wondered if there were any other examples out there of either mandates or tax incentives that folks know about.
Charlie, do you want to add something? You're muted right now. I can unmute you, I think. Oh, I can't.
So, so I was thinking something a little bit like that myself. Like, why is it so inexpensive to just throw things in a dumpster? Are there fees added on to dumpster costs that could make it maybe more economical to try to save things or minimize waste?
I think that's a great you know, segue into what the MassDEP can do for us, although I'm not sure that they can control landfill and waste to energy prices. Maybe instead, alternatively, incentivize the donation or the project manager or, you know, building owner to use reused materials. I know maybe some of the reuse centers on the line today can talk a little bit more about receiving tax incentives to donate to a nonprofit reuse center, which if you itemize your taxes, then you can receive, you know, a deduction. However, I don't know if there's incentive to use reused materials in that sense.
This is Jay. I would just add, not to what you were just saying, Abby, but to the question as far as why is it so inexpensive to just throw materials into a dumpster. And I think from my experience talking with contractors and working with contractors is that it's not necessarily that it's inexpensive to throw them into the dumpster, but it's more that it's more expensive to deconstruct as opposed to demolish. So that's where, you know, we need to do some work on figuring out how to educate contractors on better techniques for deconstruction, more efficient techniques, and then of course the value of it along with that. But when it comes to expense, it's, you know, the labor that it takes to deconstruct is where the cost comes in.
Thanks, Jay.
And I would add to that, there's sort of a cost benefit decision that has to get made during deconstruction. So if you have like a kitchen cabinet set and you're just detaching that from the wall, or some light fixtures or something, that takes relatively little time to remove and has a relatively high resale value. But if you have structural lumber like 2x4s or something, it takes, or hardwood flooring, it takes a long time to remove that, and you're not going to get a lot of money for it when you try to sell it. And structural has to be
Deb, you're breaking up a little bit.
Who's going to take the trouble to regrade, you know, old 2x4s so it can be used for structural purposes? So there are definitely some decisions that kind of get made in the field. Is like, is it worth the trouble to remove, and are you economically, does it make sense?
I think we get the gist of what you're trying to say, Deb. Evaluating the cost of deconstruction versus demolition doesn't make sense to do so, but you were breaking up just a little bit. So if you want to type in the chat the summary of what you were trying to say, that would be helpful. Also, I want to throw out there, doesn't necessarily apply to furniture and fixtures, but the MassDEP does have waste disposal bans on construction and demolition materials, debris, you know, like wood, gypsum, clean gypsum scrap, metal, cardboard, and other items. So another sort of incentive to not throw away those types of materials.
I've had a question about that. It's not quite about reuse, but it's sort of like, so there's a C&D ban, so it has to go to be recycled as C&D in some other format, I'm assuming. And I guess my question is like, A, how effective is that ban? And B, like how does C&D recycling, I guess, pricing compare with deconstruction? Although I think it sounded earlier, I think maybe Michael was saying that some things are more recyclable as C&D, whereas other things are definitely more reusable. So I guess I'm wondering about that balance.
And I think, am I the only DEP person besides Kathy?
I think
yeah.
so.
And I would not, I'm sorry, but I would not feel comfortable answering any of the C&D ban questions. We do have folks on our team that would be better versed in this question, and this is something that we can get back to you on. Yeah.
But I think, and I agree with Janine, but I think it's a great question because it maybe comes to the idea of how DEP can help support this. And maybe it's in our information that we provide and or guidance about C&D processing. Might we also provide information about donation, reuse opportunities for those materials to be directed to maybe a higher value use before recycling in that same place? So, right, I'm just thinking aloud and encourage any of you to make suggestions in that way. If there are ways that we can craft and present information so that it is accessible to you, that's something we'd like to learn today as well.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, let's focus the rest of our discussion sort of what can the MassDEP do for us to promote, greater reduction and reuse of building materials. So maybe provide template ordinances, grants, regulation, using state purchasing power to make vendors comply with good deconstruction practices, maybe utilizing the recycling dividends program, which gives money back to municipalities that require deconstruction. Just some ideas.
This is actually more of a transition between the DEP and the rest of the world. MIT used to run, I don't know what they used to call it, recycling center, because a lot of these larger institutions have a lot of turnover, a lot of furniture, doors, all the things we're concerned about. And they would warehouse them. And when people would be doing usually the smaller renovation projects or need a brand new set of office furniture, they'd go to this central warehouse. This was, I must admit, at least 15, 20 years ago. But it seems to me it's not just the MassDEP, which I think should be helpful, but a lot of these larger institutions have the firepower and the money and the interest in also doing smaller satellite scenarios, and that's something the DEP might want to take over and start to, bang the drum for this. So just a thought.
And I'd like to go back to something we were talking just a few minutes ago about, my notes here. Basically, it was involved with the building permit suggestion. I think, deconstruction takes time and takes planning. And when a contractor is out working with even a resident or a commercial property developer, timing is everything. They just want to get that building demolished and reconstructed, or even a new building reconstructed, and move on to the next one. I think the building permit process is a good one because that gives the builder time to plan it. And planning is usually where planning is necessary, and it's timing that's usually the problem. They don't have time to figure out where to bring these materials. It's just easier to dispose. So I think the building permit is a good start.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I hear from developers over and over again is that predictability is key so that they can build in the right amount of time in their schedule. So I think anything that we advocate for or implement needs to have a clear process so that everyone knows how much time to build in for deconstruction and what will be expected. Right.
So I would love to see an RFP go out for grant for for residential deconstruction and reuse, and maybe something where the idea would be to pull all the stakeholders together, like maybe the architects, the builders, and you know, reuse centers, and anyone else, you know, even homeowners, and try to follow the life cycle of used building materials. You know, maybe having an architect do the designing, the builders deconstructing and using the new used building materials, and then try to understand from that pilot where things could be made more efficient, and how we could then work with more builders and architects to grow that within the state. We do quite a few pilots, and it would just be, I think, something around that, and that's just a quick idea, but some idea around that for residential and not commercial. I think, from my perspective anyway, you know, there are builders who do a high volume of remodeling, and there may be some benefit to that as far as the volume of materials we could save and reuse.
Just kind of going off what's happening in the chat right now, they're coming from a commercial construction perspective with demolition. I've been on many jobs where, listen, this needs to get done. So you just throw a couple laborers at it, and the whole place is ripped up and everything's thrown into a dumpster. And that's the easiest for the owner to kind of digest, because, listen, there's 2 days in the schedule for demolition. And there's a much better job that contractors can do in building it on the schedule and knowing for demolition. But as I kind of stated in the chat, if I don't know if the MassDEP could give us this, but some sort of training on deconstruction, because right now with the unions, it's just, and with the owners, it's just, this is what we've done, this is what we've done. Just get it, knock it out of the park, because I want to build as soon as possible. So having that training for these laborers, for these, what have you, carpenters, to really understand, okay, this is either how we used to do it, or for this project specifically, if we're still just doing pilot projects, this is what we should be doing. I think that some sort of guidelines or training, especially like I said in Boston and the surrounding area for unions, I think would be perfect to really get them on board with this, and start showing it to owners, start showing it to kind of buildings that need this deconstruction. I think would be extremely beneficial. And something that they could, if I know a lot of other sustainability managers at construction firms, if we all could sign on to something like this, we could definitely push it. We just need to kind of know how to do it, to be perfectly honest. How does this start? How does it go by? What does the process look like? And how much extra time are we adding here during this training and during this first few projects we're doing this? I think if we have all those factors, we can sell it to owners, we can sell it to our own companies, our project managers, and make this process a bit smoother.
Michael, I think that's a great idea. That I think that you know, to build on that, there could be a pilot that could start the process, and then that could answer those questions also, to help the business owners, the contractors understand the business side of it too, not just the physical deconstruction and training, which is definitely necessary. But I think that if some kind of pilot or study could be done to understand all of the roadblocks, and then how to mitigate those roadblocks, then that could be scaled up across the state with other builders, contractors, and so forth. So I think that's a great idea.
I think I've been on that wave. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. I was actually going to mention you in my next comment. It sounds like you've done a lot with you said you yourself personally, I think, trained 20 plus businesses, and I wanted to see sort of your experience with that, maybe, and also if there's models out there from a training perspective. I hope it's not too far of an analogy, but Boston has the Urban Farming Institute, which helps farmers do urban farming. And it also feeds into local resilience and that whole local food movement. So if deconstruction becomes a movement, it'd be sort of amazing to sort of have a hub that could support training. But yeah, I'd love to hear, Dave, your take on that training piece too.
Well, I'm the director of the Building Deconstruction Institute, and we have a training center where we bring in people from around the country. So you have to come to Washington State, but they come here to learn how to deconstruct and how to do it efficiently, but not just deconstruct, like was brought up earlier. You know, what about the business side of it? What about selling the material? What about marketing? You know, all those issues. What about lead-based paint? Things like that. So, so yeah, we have a full training program, and we bring people in, and we erase their learning curve so that you might say that they go from day 1 to year 10 all in probably a 10-day period. And we show them, you know, like the tricks to deconstructing quickly and saving the material. We identify the value. We cut through, you know, a lot of the techniques that where most people are doing it wrong. And so, but you know, that just came from experience. So, and yeah, we've been really successful in doing that. And I think that here's what I suggest for you, any group that I talk to all over the place, including Europe, it's the same thing. You need to hit a home run. And so what you do is you start with an easy project, and you start with a pilot like you were suggesting. So you might call it a pilot, or you might just you know, incentivize someone to start a business, and then you start providing them projects that you know, let's say there are 100 projects, and they just randomly take one, and it might be a really hard one. It might be hard to complete. And so it might, you know, there might be 90 projects that would have been easier, but they just took the first one that came along. I have a project that's right across the border in Saratoga Springs, and I'm working with a company from Massachusetts on that. And these are buildings that were gutted. They were going to remodel them, and then they decided not to. So a lot of the hard work has already been done. So their first deconstruction project isn't going to be a hard one because a lot of the hard work has already been completed and those materials have been hauled away. So, but what we're talking about really is building up infrastructure. The training is a way to build up infrastructure. Incentivizing a business or a bunch, you know, several businesses to get started, that's infrastructure. Working with local reuse stores like, you know, Eco Building Bargains, Boston, you know, all of those groups, you know, then you start building up infrastructure, like they have somewhere to take the material, or they have some training, or they have some funding and all of that. And you start working your way from there. You complete a project, and maybe you go on to one that's a little harder. And at some point you have enough activity that it starts to attract more activity, where people hear about a project and then they go, that's what I want.
Thanks, Dave. I'm curious if your organization creates any case studies or like has concrete numbers that we could share out with the group at some point on your various projects. And then we'll go to Janine, and I think I saw someone else had a hand up.
Yeah, you know, we're trying to produce that case study from this summer. I worked with a demolition contractor. He had only done demolition up until he met me. We deconstructed 4 buildings together instead of demolishing them. We created 20 times more jobs. That's an example of one of our case studies. We took down a building on live TV. You know, it took us 15 hours to deconstruct a 3,000 square foot home. I mean, these are the kind of things that we're doing just so that groups like you will not question this, you know, like all of the things that we've been doing for 28 years. and to say that we have 125 clients that are running successful reuse businesses. So I just want you all to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and this does work. You just have to, it's a slow process, and you have to build up infrastructure to do it. And I'll just give you one last thing, and it's one of those, case studies. We looked at the EPA and we identified how much waste each person in the United States generates. It's about 4.4 pounds a day. And if you multiply that times 75 years, it's about 120 to 125,000 pounds of waste that we'll generate in our lifespan, wrapping and whatever. The homes that we're deconstructing, the average building that we're deconstructing weighs about 125,000 pounds. So when you think about what we're doing here, each building that we're deconstructing